Hi everyone, and welcome back to Leah's Lifestyle. Today we are at it again with another Berkshire Hathaway Chairman's Letter to Shareholders. Today we have 1982, and last time I did it in a whole run. Found out they are for sure an hour, so we're gonna just cut these puppies in half because I don't enjoy doing them in an hour at a time, and I'm sure you guys don't enjoy listening to them with an hour at a time. So, without further ado, let's start reading this baby. Berkshire Hathaway, March 3rd, 1983. To the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. I can do it. Operating earnings of $31.5 million in 1982 amounted to only 9.8% of beginning equity capital, valuing securities at cost, down from 15.2% in 1981 and far below our recent high of 19.4% in 1978. This decline rarely results from 1. A significant deterioration in insurance underwriting results, 2. A considerable expansion of equity capital with a corresponding growth in the business we operated directly, and 3. A continuously enlarging commitment of our resources to investment in partially owned, non-operated businesses. Accumulating rules dictate that a major part of our pro-rate share of earnings from such businesses must be excluded from Berkshire reported earnings. It was only a few years ago that we told you that operating earnings, equity, capital percentage, with proper allowance for a few other variables, was the most important yardstick of single-year managerial performances. While we still believe this to be the case with the vast majority of companies, we believe it utility in our own case has greatly diminished. You should be suspicious of such an assertion. Yardsticks seldom are discarded while yielding favorable readings, but when results deteriorate, most managers for disposition of the yardstick rather than disposition of the manager. To managers faced with such deterioration, a more flexible measuring system often suggests itself. Just shoot the arrow of business performance into a blank canvas and then carefully draw the bullseye around the implanted arrow. We generally believe in preset, long-lived, and small bullseyes. However, because of the importance of item 3 above, further explanation in the following section, we believe our abandonment of the operating earnings equities capital bullseye to be warranted. Non-reported ownership earnings. The appended financial statement reflecting accounting earnings that generally include our proportionate share of earnings from any underlying business in which our ownership is at least 20%. Below the 20% ownership figure, however, only our share of dividends paid by the underlying business until it includes in our accounting numbers. Undistributed earnings of such less than 20% owned businesses are totally ignored. There are a few exceptions to this rule. E.g., we own about 35% of Geico Corporation, but because we have assigned our voting rights, the company is treated for accounting purposes as less than 20% holdings. Thus, dividends received from Geico in 1982 of $3.5 million after taxes are the only item included in our accounting earnings. An additional $23 million that represents our share of Geico's undistributed operating earnings for 1982 is totally excluded from our reported operating earnings. If Geico had earned less money in 1982 but had paid an additional $1 million in dividends, our reported earnings would have been larger despite the poorer business results. Conversely, if Geico reported earnings would have been unchanged, clearly accounting earnings are seriously misrepresented economic reality. We prefer a concept of economic earnings that include all undistributed earnings, regardless of ownership percentage. In our view, the value to all earnings of the retailed earnings of a business enterprise is determined by the effectiveness with which those earnings are used, and not to the size of one's ownership percentage. If you have owned 0.01 of 1% of Berkshire during the past decade, you have benefited economically in full measure from your share of our retained earnings, no matter what your accounting system. Proportionately, you have done just as well as if you had owned the magic 20%. But if you owned 100% a great many capital investing businesses during that decade, retained earnings that were credited fully and with painstaking precision to your understated accounting methods, have resulted in minor or zero economic value. This is not a criticism of accounting procedures. We would not like to have the job of designing a better system. It's simply to say that managers and investors alike must understand that accounting numbers are the beginning, not the end of business valuation. In most corporations, less than 20% ownership positions are unimportant, perhaps in part because the previent maximization of cherished reported earnings, and that distinction between accounting and economic results we have just discussed matters little. But in our own case, such positions are of the very large and growing importance. Their magnitude, we believe, is making our report operating earnings figures of limited significance. In our 1981 annual report, we predicted that our share of undisturbed earnings from 4 of our major non-controlled holdings would aggregate over $35 million in 1982, with no change in our holdings of 3 of these companies, Geico, General Foods, and the Washington Post, and a considerable increase in our ownership of the 4th, R.J. Reynolds Industries. Our shares of undisturbed 1982 operating earnings of this group came to well over $40 million. This number, not reflecting at all in our earnings, is greater than our total reported earnings, which include only the $14 million in dividends received from these companies. And, of course, we have a number of smaller ownership interests that, in aggregate, had substantial additional undisturbed earnings. We attach real significance to the general magnitude of these numbers, but we don't believe they should be carried to 10 decimal places. Realization of Berkshire of such retained earnings through improved market valuations is subject to very substantial but indeterminate taxation. And while retained earnings over the year and in the aggregate have translated into at least equal market value for the shareholders, the transition has been both extraordinarily uneven among companies and irregular and unpredictable in timing. However, this very unevenness and irregularity offers advantages to the value-oriented purchaser of fractional proportions of business. This investor may select from almost the entire array of major American corporations, including many far superior to virtually any of the businesses that could be bought in their entirety in a negotiated deal. And fractional interest purchases can be made in an action market where prices are set by participants with behavior patterns that sometimes resemble those of an army of manic depressive lemmings. That's a word I haven't heard in a while. Within this gigantic action area, it is our job to select businesses with economic characteristics, allowing each dollar of retained earnings to be translated eventually into at least $1 of market value. Despite a lot of mistakes, we have so far achieved this goal. In doing so, we have been greatly assisted by Arthur Okun's Puritan saint of economics, Saint Offset. In some case, this is Retained earnings attributed to our ownership positions have had insignificant or even negative impact on the market value, while in other major positions, a dollar retained by investee corporations has been translated into $2 or more of market value. To date, our corporate overachievers have more than offset the laggards. If we can continue this record, it will validate our efforts to maximize economic earnings, regardless of the impact upon accounting earnings. Satisfactory as our partial ownership approach has been, what really makes us dance is the purchase of 100% of good businesses at reasonable prices. We've accomplished this feat at few times and expect to do so again. But it is an extraordinarily difficult job, far more difficult than the purchase at attractive prices of fractional interest. As we look at the major acquisition that others made during 1982, our reaction is not envy, but relief that we are non-participants. For in many of these acquisitions, managerial intellect wilted in competition with managerial adrenaline. The thrill of the chase blinded the purchaser to the consequences of the catch. Pascal's observation seems apt. Quote, It has struck me that all men's misfortunes spring from the single cause that they are unable to stay quietly in one room. End quote. Your chairman left the room once too often last year and almost started in the acquisition follies of 1982. In retrospect, our major accomplishment of the year was that a very large purchase to which we had firmly committed was unable to be completed for reasons totally beyond our control. Had it come off, this transaction would have consumed extraordinary amounts of time and energy, all for a most uncertain payoff. If we were to introduce graphics to this report illustrating favorable businesses developments of the past year, 2 blank pages depicting this deal would be the appropriate centerfold. Our partial ownership approach can be continued soundly only as long as portions of attractive businesses can be acquired at attractive prices. We need a moderately priced stock market to assist us in this endeavor. The market, like the Lord, helps those who help themselves. But, unlike the Lord, the market does not forgive those who know not what they do. For the investor, a too high purchase price for the stock of an excellent company can undo the effect of a subsequent decade of favorable business development. Should the stock market advance to considerably higher levels, our ability to utilize capital effectively in partial ownership positions will be reduced or eliminated. This will happily, periodically, just 10 years ago, at the height of the two-tier market mania, with high return on equity businesses bid to the sky by institutional investors. Berkshire's insurance subsidiaries owned only $18 million in market value of equities, excluding their interest in blue chip stamps. At the time, such equity holdings amounted to about 15% of our insurance company investment versus the present 80%. There were as many good businesses around in 1972 as in 1982. But the price the stock market placed upon those businesses in 1972 looked absurd. While high stock prices in the future would make our performance look good temporarily, they would hurt our long-term business prospects rather than help them. We currently are seeing earlier traces of this problem. Long-term corporate performance. Our gain in the net worth during 1982, valuing equities held by our insurance subsidiaries at market value, less capital gain tax payable if unrealized gains were actively realized, amounted to $208 million on a beginning net worth base of $519 million. The percentage gain was 40%. During the 18-year tenure of present management, book value has grown from $19.46 per share to $737.43 per share, or 22% compounded annually. You can be certain that this percentage will diminish in the future. Geometric progressions eventually forge their own anchor. Berkshire economic goal remains to reduce a long-term rate of return while above the return achieved by the average large American corporation. Our willingness to purchase either businesses coupled with reasonable discipline about our willingness to purchase either partial or total ownership position in favorable situation businesses coupled with reasonable discipline about the price where we are willing to pay should give us a good chance of achieving our goal. Again, this year, the gain in market value of practically owned or partially owned businesses outpaced the gain in underlying economic values of those businesses. For example, $79 million of our $208 million gains is attributed to an increased market price for Geico. This company continues to do exceptionally well, and we are more impressed than ever by the strength of Geico's basic business idea and by the management skills of Jack Barney, although not found in the catechism of the better business schools. Quote, let's Jack do it, unquote, works fine as a corporate creed for us. However, Geico's increase in market value during the past 2 years has been considerably greater than the gain in its intrinsic business value. Impressive as the latter has been, we expect such a favorable variation at some point. As the perception of investors converged with business reality, and we look forward to substantial future gains in the underlying business value accompanied by irregular, but eventually full, market recognition of such gains. Year-to-year variances, however, cannot consistently be in our favor, even if our practically owned businesses continue to perform well. In an economic sense, there will be years when they perform poorly in the market. At such time, our net worth could shrink significantly. We will not be distressed by such a shrinkage. If the businesses continue to look attractive and we have cash available, we simply will add to our holdings at even more favorable prices. Real quick, let me see who's here in the stream with us. We have Phantom Charizard. Photon. Oh my god, why do I keep doing that? Sorry, Photon Charizard. Repeatedly booping his nose. Thanks. Yay, second place. Nice. How you doing today? We're just reading this. We got a few more minutes here. Give me 10 more minutes. I'm going to keep reading. We'll take a break. Sources of reported earnings. The table below shows the source of Berkshire's reported earnings. In 1981 and 1982, Berkshire owned about 60% of blue chip stamps, which, in turn, owned 80% of Wesco Financial Corporation. The table displays aggregate operating earnings of the various business entities, as well as Berkshire's share of those earnings. All of the significant gains and losses attributable to unusual sales of assets by any of the businesses entities are aggregated with securities transactions in the line near the bottom of the table and are not included in operating earnings. Okay, I think just like last time, we're going to kind of go over the chart pretty quickly instead of you just reading all the numbers. Again, it has the earnings before income taxes, the total with 1982 and then the year prior, Berkshire shares 1982 and the year prior, net earnings after tax, Berkshire shares 1982, and then the year prior. And then all the operating earnings has all of their businesses, which is the insurance group, Berkshire, One Book Textiles, the retail stores, See's Candies, Buffalo's Evening News, Blue Chip Stamps, Westco Financial, Mutual Savings and Loans, Precision Steel, Debt, and others. So at the end of it, starting with 1982, it total is 77,753. In 1981, it was 98,464. So gone down a bit. And the shares is 94,617. In 1981, it would be 80,386. So it's gone down. And then Berkshire shares after taxes 1982, 46,374. And 1981 would be 62,604. And then it looks like all the things they had, the textiles was going negative, is not as negative as before. The Buffalo Evening News, which was negative because they had bought some, is about the same. Their debt stayed about the same. Not much change there. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. And then there's a little star. And there's some stars next to... Are there stars next to the business? Yeah, like next to other, actually. It's the only one. It says amortization of intangibility arising in accounts for purchases of businesses, i.e. See's, Mutual, and Buffalo Evening News, is reflected in the category disguised as other. On page 45 through 61 of this report, we have reproduced the narrative reports of the principal executives of Blue Chip and Westco, in which they described 1982 operations. A copy of the full annual report of either company will be mailed to any Berkshire shareholder, and then they tell you where you can mail it. I've gone through that before. I believe you will find the Blue Chip Chronicle of Development in the Buffalo newspaper situation particularly interesting. There are now only 14 cities in the United States with daily newspaper whose weekend circulation exceeds that of the Buffalo News. But the real story has been the growth in Sunday circulation. 6 years ago, prior to the introduction of a Sunday edition of the news, the long-established Courier Express, as the only Sunday newspaper published in Buffalo, had circulation of 272,000. The news now has Sunday circulations of 367,000, a 35% gain, even though the number of households within the primary circulation area has shown little change during the 6 years. We know of no city in the United States with a long history of 7-day newspaper publication in which the percentage of households purchasing the Sunday newspaper has grown at anything like this rate. To the contrary, in most cities, household penetration figures have grown negligible or not at all. Our key manager in Buffalo, Henry Urban, Stan Limsey, and Murray Light, Clyde Pinson, Dave Perona, and Dick Feather deserve great credit for this unmatched expansion in Sunday readership. As we indicate earlier, undistributed earnings in companies we do not control and are now fully as important as the reported operating earnings detained in the preceded tables. The distributed portion of non-controlled earnings, of course, finds its way into the table primarily through the net investment income segment of insurance group earnings. We show below Berkshire proportionally holds in those non-controlled businesses for which only distributed earnings, dividends, are included in our earnings. And then just like the tables that I've read fully before, that I'm not going to do again, it has the number of shares that it has for all of them, an A, C, or B next to that, then the name of the companies, like affiliate publications, Crum & Foster, General Foods, Geico, Handy and Harmon, Interpublic groups of companies, Media General, Ogilvia and Mather, R.J. Reynolds Industries, Time, and Washington Post. Then it has the cost and the market. And right now, their total common stock for that at cost was $424,033, and at market is $945,622. So it's going like what they paid for it base where it's at price right now has gone up. And then if there's an A next to it, means all owned by Berkshire or its in insurance subsidiaries. B is blue chip and Norwesco are shares, and then C is temporary holding as cash substitutes. And it looks like there's only one in the cash, and that's Crum and Foster. Everything else is like either all owned or with blue chip and Wesco. In case you haven't noticed, there is an important investing lesson to be derived from this table. Nostalgia should be weighed heavily in stock selection. Our two largest unrealized gains are in Washington Post and Geico, companies with which your chairman formed his first commercial connection as the ages of 13 and 20, respectively, after straying for roughly 25 years. We returned as investors in the mid-1970s. The table quantifies the regards for even long-delayed corporate fidelity. Our controlled and non-controlled businesses operate over such a wide spectrum that detailed commentary here would prove too lengthy. Much financial and operational information regarding the controlled businesses is included in management discussion on page 34 through 39 and in the narrative report on pages 45 through 61. However, our largest area of business activities can begin and almost certainly will continue to be the property casualty insurance area, so commentary on development in that industry is appropriate. Insurance industry conditions. I think this would be a good place to take our pause, so that way it can be for section 2. So if you're finding this on YouTube, thank you for watching the first section of the 1982 Berkshire Hathaway. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that bell icon down below so that way you know every single time when I post, which is a lot more recently. And don't forget to leave a comment. Do you prefer to just listen to the whole 1 hour long? Want me to do it all the way through? Or are you enjoying it when I split it up more? Let me know. And what did you guys get from this first section? Until next time, guys.